The Hong Kong Institute of Chartered Secretaries recently held its 10th Biennial Corporate Governance Conference. In this session of the conference, two speakers give their views on some common corporate governance issues in mainland China and Hong Kong. First, we hear from David Tam, who is Joint Company Secretary at China Railway Group Limited.
In the coming 20 minutes or so, I would like to share with you some understanding experience on some CG issues in China and Hong Kong. And my speech will be divided into four parts. First part is some common issues, and then I will touch on some PSI disclosure, regulations on insider trading, and then the last part is some suggestions to the regulatory bodies in China and Hong Kong. Okay, let's start. Due to the continuous development of the globalization, worldwide economy is going to be more integrated and competition is getting more intense than ever. Companies strive for increase in efficiency of corporate governance to meet its development needs and to be more competitive. We can see that corporate governance practices in China and Hong Kong mainly adopted the principle of segregation of rights and responsibilities. The two places learn from each other and set up its CG practice with its own characteristics. Of course, due to the difference in economic system, level of economic development, and cultural background, there are still differences in corporate governance practice between Hong Kong and China. First one is the setup and operation of shareholders' meetings. Shareholders of a company can exercise their ultimate source of power at the shareholders' meeting. This applies to both China and Hong Kong. However, all rights and responsibilities of shareholders in China are clearly laid down in the company law in China. While in Hong Kong, the company law only prescribes the requirement of an annual shareholders meeting, and shareholders meeting has the right to determine all the important matters of the company. It appears that the shareholders meeting in Hong Kong is less powerful than that in China. But realistically, the rights and responsibilities of shareholders in China are limited to those described in the company law. Similarly, all rights and responsibilities of the board are limited in the clauses laid down in the China company law. While in Hong Kong, shareholders will often delegate the management of the operation of the company to the board and management. And the rights of the board are often mentioned in the articles of the company and are exercised through board resolutions. Therefore, I would say that the regulation of rights of the board in Hong Kong is more flexible. And also regarding the senior management, China company law clearly states that management level is a statutory authority organization of a company with all rights and responsibilities listed out in the company law. Clearly, Hong Kong is not the same in these aspects too. In Hong Kong, according to the articles of the company, the board can delegate some or all of its rights and responsibilities to the management. However, for the requirements of independent directors and board committee, the requirements of China and Hong Kong are highly consistent. Take China Railway as an example. In order to comply with the company law and listing requirements of China and Hong Kong, we have 7 directors to form the board and 5 supervisors to form the supervisory committee. We have also 5 board committees, and our senior management consists of 8 persons. Also, since we are a SOE, we also have a Communist Party organization in our CG structure. Okay, next one is about the company secretary. In Hong Kong, company law requires each company has 1 company secretary, while in China, we often call it secretary to the board. Actually, their responsibilities are similar, which mainly include the arrangement and record of board and shareholders meetings. In China, company law requires companies to set up its own supervisory committee, which is a supervisory organization of a company. The main job of supervisory committee includes supervision of financial matters and act of directors and management in order to ensure that directors and management act for the best interests of the shareholders. Hong Kong obviously does not require to set up a supervisory committee, and the supervision job is mainly carried out by the board of directors. Let's move on to the second part about the disclosure of the price-sensitive information, PSI. Actually, PSI disclosure in China and Hong Kong are very similar in many aspects. First is the principle. Both places require PSI disclosure to be true, accurate, timely, and complete. Second is the scope. The key issue here is to determine whether the information is price sensitive or not. Overall speaking, the requirement of China and Hong Kong is similar, which is based on fundamental principles supplemented by practical examples, and in some cases, it involves companies' judgment. Next one is timing. Timely disclosure is required for PSI in both China and Hong Kong. However, if there is any evidence that the PSI cannot be kept confidential, such as there is a media reports at abnormal share price fluctuation, both regulatory bodies in Hong Kong and China require immediate disclosure of such PSI. Final point is about the disclosure method. In China, a company requires to submit the PSI announcement and relating documents to SSE, Shanghai Stock Exchange, for registration before disclosure. PSI announcement will be published in the SSE website and designated newspapers. Whereas in Hong Kong, the PSI announcement is required to be uploaded to the Hong Kong Stock Exchange and the company's website. So I would say the disclosure method is basically the same for both China and Hong Kong at the moment. After talking about the similarities, let's look at the differences. Hong Kong Stock Exchange has a disclosure guideline on PSI, which serves as an explanation and supplement to relevant listing rules. However, there is no such guideline in China, and the relevant rules and regulations can be found in securities law, listing rules, and the information disclosure management measures of listed companies. So I would say Hong Kong is more systematic than China in this aspect. Second, the responsible person for PSI disclosure. In Hong Kong, we all know that only the issuer, directors, and senior management are responsible for PSI disclosure. However, in China, the scope of responsible person for PSI disclosure is more broad, which covers the issuer, shareholders, directors, and supervisors. Third is about the monitoring of the abnormal share price fluctuation. In China, if SSE and CSRC consider there is an abnormal share price fluctuation of a company, the company has to publish an announcement in the following day to explain the reason for the share price fluctuation. In Hong Kong, Hong Kong Stock Exchange would normally first inquire the company for the reasons for the share price fluctuation and ask the company to publish announcement as necessary. You may notice that there are two differences in practice between Hong Kong and China in this regard. First, in China, the monitoring is done by SSE and CSRC, and while in Hong Kong, such work is carried by Hong Kong Stock Exchange only. Another difference is that the company is explicitly required to republish an announcement in the following day in China. But while in Hong Kong, the company requires to publish an announcement in a timely manner, which is without stating an explicit date. The next topic that I would like to discuss is insider trading. The regulation on insider trading in China and Hong Kong are gradually improved, especially in China. The legislation of insider trading has significantly improved, and tackling insider trading has been one of the main focuses of regulatory bodies in the past decades. At present, the highest penalty on insider trading is 5 times the fine and imprisonment of 10 years in China. In Hong Kong, SFC is the main regulatory body to tackle insider trading. There are 6 improper market behaviors stated in the SFO, as well as an insider information disclosure guidance. The highest penalty in Hong Kong is Hong Kong dollar 10 million fine and imprisonment of 10 years. Also, the definition of connected and insider person in China is pretty broad. It includes the company's directors, supervisors, and senior management, shareholders holding more than 5% of shareholding, and other persons who have access to insider information. Such definition is similar to that of connected persons in Hong Kong. Okay, time for the differences on insider trading. In Hong Kong, we have civil penalty and criminal penalty as punishment on insider trading. While in China, we have administrative and criminal liabilities. CSRC can impose administrative penalty and refer the case to Public Security Bureau for criminal investigation and legal proceedings. I would like to highlight that the highest administrative penalty is a fine of up to renminbi $300,000, which is obviously not intimidating enough as it should be. The second difference is about the party initiating legal proceedings. As mentioned above, Hong Kong SFC can initiate legal proceedings based on SFO, but while in China, CSRC doesn't have such right, but have to refer the case to Public Security Bureau for handling. My final part is on some suggestions on the security regulatory bodies in China and Hong Kong. The first one is about the refinement on responsibilities and duties of directors in China. In Hong Kong, the responsibilities and duties of directors are well defined, which makes Hong Kong companies are more centralized and driven by directors, and the shareholders' interests can be better protected. But while in China, although directors' duties and responsibilities are laid down in the company law, it is not clear enough and still needs refinement. Also in China, all responsibilities and duties of directors and shareholders' meetings are laid down in the company law. It is good for standardized management, but it should allow certain flexibility of the company to decide such responsibilities and duties in its article of association according to the company's own characteristic and situation. In Hong Kong, we don't have a specialized supervisory organization to monitor the board and the directors. But shareholders monitor the directors and the company's financial position with the assistance of external professionals like auditors. This could reduce management costs and increase operating efficiency. But it is difficult to achieve timely and instant monitoring on the potential abuse of power by directors. It seems that the regulation in China is more reasonable in this sense. Meeting rules and procedures in Hong Kong are more stringent than in China. For example, in Hong Kong, the shareholders' resolutions are divided into ordinary resolution and special resolution. And voting methods are divided into voting by hand and voting by poll. China is more emphasized on the prescribed authority and rights of organizations in the company, but lacking the design of the procedures on how to exercise those authority and rights. It is necessary for China to make reference to Hong Kong on meeting rules and procedures in order to increase the overall efficiency of the company's meetings. Also, by making reference to the more matured PSI disclosure system of Hong Kong, China needs to publish PSI disclosure guidance as soon as possible to increase the overall operability of the PSI disclosure system in China. And also in the past few decades, capital markets are developed rapidly with more and more companies listed in Hong Kong and China. These include dual-listed companies like China Railway, or parent companies, subsidiaries, and connected companies are listed in different exchanges. I think we need to further study and improve the synchronization of information disclosure of China and Hong Kong. And also, we need to increase the consistency on information disclosure between China and Hong Kong. Integration of secondary markets is the development trend of information disclosure regulations. Our information disclosure regulations should be developed from strict to open, from low-level regulations to high-level regulations, and from local standards to international standards. For example, at present, there are specific laws in China and Hong Kong for China companies to be listed in Hong Kong. But in the long run, we should aim for a unified set of law for China companies to be listed in Hong Kong and further improvement in consistency on information disclosure between China and Hong Kong. Finally, I would like to see more cooperation in supervision between China and Hong Kong. A-share and H-share capital markets are relatively independent and have its own characteristics. There are differences in supervision concept, supervision method, freedom of market, and market structure. However, further cooperation between China and Hong Kong security market could help to eliminate those differences, which is without doubt is advantageous to both parties and markets. In the process of strengthening cooperation, the regulatory bodies need to take into consideration and strike a balance between operating burden to the listed companies and the protection of stakeholders' interests. And that's all for my sharing. Thank you.
We now hear from Wei Fang, Chief Representative in Hong Kong for PetroChina Company Limited. The title of his presentation is A Tale of Two Markets, Convergence or Divergence in Corporate Governance.
PetroChina is the largest oil and gas producer in China and one of the largest in the world. We own and operate 2/3 of the oil and gas reserve and production capacity in China. By the end of last year, our oil and gas production ranked number 1 and number 2, respectively, among the publicly listed oil and gas companies around the world. PetroChina was also one of the first major large-scale SOE go to public in Hong Kong market. We did our H-share IPO in year 2000 and Asia listing in year 2007. So as a duly listed SOE, PetroChina needs to understand both the mainland and Hong Kong market. Nowadays, with the Stock Connect programs, there's a lot of talk about convergence of the two markets. However, as a duly listed AH company, we think mainland and Hong Kong markets are very different. And that's what I'm going to talk about today. There are many, many differences. What I categorized here today mainly in terms of 3 areas: legal framework, corporate governance philosophies, and the sophistication of the market constituents. Let me elaborate some of the key differences of each of those. First, the two markets had very different legal framework that have resulted in major structural differences when it comes to corporate governance. For example, the roles of the chairman and the CEO. In the mainland corporate law, there's no specific definition of CEOs. So in many cases in the past, the chairman of the mainland companies would assume the role of the CEO. In Hong Kong, the listing rules requires the chairman and CEO to be different individuals. In China, board of supervisors is required in the mainland companies, but you don't find this in Hong Kong. Another difference is that it's not mandatory to establish a nomination committee of board of directors in the mainland, but it is required in Hong Kong's corporate governance code. When it comes to connect party transactions, there is also different set of rules. For example, a board secretary is regarded as a connected person in the mainland, but not in Hong Kong. The legal framework is external force that influence the different rules and regulations when it comes to corporate governance. But the difference in practice are the internal force within organizations, the governance philosophies of the controlling shareholders and the management. The mainland and Hong Kong market diverge substantially in this front. Mainland listed companies have relatively more concentrated shareholding structure. For state-owned and listed companies in particular, major shareholders have absolute control over the company, giving major shareholder a high degree of influence over the corporate governance. In addition, controlling shareholders of these companies are supervised by SASAC and other relevant administrative departments, placing their corporate governance under the indirect influence of the government administrative divisions. On the contrary, Hong Kong listed companies have relatively diluted equity structure. All parties have strong willingness to participate in the corporate governance and strong recognition of what it takes to be the public company. Besides regulators and major shareholders, other market constituents such as investors and financial media certainly have their impact in the corporate governance practice of the two markets. The mainland market is still not at a mature stage and has higher proportion of retail investors who are less inclined and less able to exercise their rights. However, Hong Kong market is more mature with a higher proportion of institutional investors who place great emphasis of participating on corporate governance issues. Major institutional investors like Aberdeen, BlackRock, Templeton, all have dedicated teams and specialists advising them on major governance issues, and they had a big impact over the corporate governance practices in Hong Kong and in the region. Shareholder service consultants such as SS, Class Lewis, Risk Matches also played an important role. So we have all the differences in the two markets. Is that always going to be the case? In recent years, the mainland and Hong Kong market have continued to collaborate in terms of regulatory policies and communications, drawing on each other's strengths. On the back of Shanghai Hong Kong Stock Connect and the upcoming Shenzhen Hong Kong Stock Connect, these two schemes will help to converge corporate governance practice of listed companies in the both market. But in spite of this move towards more convergence, we believe that the two markets are fundamentally different. And those differences will remain for a long time still. After more than a century of development, Hong Kong capital market is more mature. It enjoys highly transparent legal system, wide global recognition, and a high proportion of institutional investor and a variety of capital products. In the contrast, mainland market only developed over a short span of 20 years, and it's still at a developing stage, as can be seen in its high turnover rate and market speculation activities. So as we said at the beginning, I want to share our perspective on these differences as a duly listed SOE. Let me tell you about our corporate governance practices. First, we highly value effective communication with shareholders and work hard to encourage shareholders' engagement in corporate governance. Since IPO, taking care of interests of shareholders, big or small, has always been one of our most important objectives. We place a strong emphasis on communicating effectively with shareholders. For institutional investors, we proactively seek their views and recommendations on business development. We are one of the very few mainland-based companies that conduct governance roadshow, engagement roadshow, where we consult with our shareholders on issues like general mandate, function of the board, as well as the connected party transactions. Our board of directors plays a crucial role in our practice of corporate governance. Over the years, the board of directors and the board committees have helped to make sure that proper check and balance are in place. Our INEDs possess a wealth of experience and expertise and take their duties seriously to make sure that the interests of all shareholders are addressed. We are one of the very first mainland listed SOEs to establish nomination committee in accordance with the requirement of Hong Kong listing rules to strengthen the roles of the board of directors in corporate governance. We have implemented internal control and comprehensive risk management measures to ensure effective corporate governance. We are among the first Chinese companies that implement internal control at an early stage. We launched a comprehensive internal control system in the year 2003, and which came into operation in 2006. The comprehensive risk management measures started in 2008. Since IPO, we have continued improving our transparency through voluntary disclosure. We started publishing our annual HSE report in year 2000, and since 2009, it is being known as the Sustainability Report. The report focuses on disclosing non-financial information to the public. We are one of the pioneers among the listed companies in Hong Kong in terms of publishing information related to ESG. Over the years, the report and our ESG performance have drawn increasing attentions from institutional investors, international rating agencies, and NGOs. And we conduct regular exchange with our global peers, shareholders, and NGOs in terms of benchmarking and improving disclosure. Through responding their questions and concerns, we strive to strengthen our ESG practice by studying the best practices and benchmark ourselves against our peers. Last but not least, we strive to build a balanced relationship with our controlling shareholders. Our controlling shareholder, CNPC, holds 86% of our stakes. Their support and understanding is very important to the corporate governance practice of PetroChina. One of my roles as compliance officer is also to update the CNPC management with the latest change of the listing rules, the corporate governance practice of our peers, and the questions and concerns from independent shareholders. We often invite our board members from CNPC to participate in the result briefing, IR roadshow, and conferences, and have them to have a direct communication with independent shareholders. This practice has proven to be very effective. CNPC management try to fully align its interests with the interests of other stakeholders and proactively support the development of the company and the independent operation of the company. This has created a favorable internal and external environment for PetroChina's development. Let me wrap up briefly by saying it is a very interesting time for all of us. With the Connect program, it is vital for us to understand the nuance of the both markets. And while there are trends towards convergence between the two markets, we believe that those major differences between Mainland and Hong Kong will still exist for a long time. And those differences will shape how organizations practice corporate governance. This is why we want to participate in this conference. It is important for all of us to constantly learn and improve our corporate governance practices. Thank you all for letting PetroChina be a part of the conversation. Thank you.